Somewhere in this country, someone is holding an ugly old piece of jewelry over a donation bin, deciding whether it's even worth keeping the box open one more second. It isn't pretty. It isn't shiny in the way new jewelry is shiny. It looks dated, a little embarrassing, maybe even a little creepy. And every instinct in that person's body is telling them to let it go. And that instinct is exactly why it's about to end up in a landfill instead of an auction house. Today I'm walking you through 10 pieces of jewelry so unattractive, so old-fashioned, so easy to dismiss at a single glance that most people throw them away or sell them for pocket change without a second look. And that is precisely why they are worth a fortune. Stick around, because number one on this list is the piece that costs people the most money of anyone on today's countdown, and almost nobody sees it coming. Number 10, the chunky Bakelite bangle. Let's start with the piece almost everyone gets wrong the moment they see it. Thick, scuffed, plastic-looking, the kind of thing that seems like it belongs in a $5 bin at a flea market, shoved between old buttons and a broken watch. Most people's brains file it under garbage on sight, and honestly, the reaction makes sense. Nobody grows up thinking old plastic is worth money, but here's what they don't teach you. Bakelite was the first fully synthetic plastic ever made, produced mainly from the 1920s through the 1940s, and serious collectors chase certain colors with a quiet, almost private intensity that would genuinely surprise you if you saw it up close. Color decides almost everything here. A common butterscotch piece might bring $50 to $300, which already isn't nothing. But a rare cobalt blue, a deep dark purple, or an especially vivid red can bring 3 to 5 times that amount. And here's the ugly little secret nobody mentions. The uglier and more discolored the piece looks to an untrained eye, the older and more oxidized it often is. And in certain colorways, that discoloration actually raises the price instead of lowering it. Rub the piece hard until it warms under your thumb, then lift it and smell it. A sharp whiff of formaldehyde means you might be holding real money in your hand, not a forgotten toy from the bottom of a craft bin. One more thing before we move on. Bakelite figurals, brooches carved into fruit, fish, and little animals, sit in an entirely different tier of the market from the plain bangles. A cherry red carved fruit pin, with its original hand-painted details, has sold for well over $8,000 at auction. The exact same pin found in a garage sale box gets casually priced at $2. Number 9, the Gaudy rhinestone starburst brooch. This is the piece your grandmother pinned to her Sunday coat, the one so big, so loud, and so over the top that it seems almost embarrassing by modern standards. That blinding brightness is exactly why people shove it into the giveaway pile without thinking twice, right alongside the buttons and the broken zippers. But certain mid-century makers use genuine high-clarity Austrian crystal in these oversized starburst designs, stones cut and set with a level of care that cheap bargain bin jewelry never came close to. And that quality is why these pieces have held their value decade after decade. Signed examples from the right maker in good condition routinely bring $200 to $500. and the more unusual, more theatrical designs climb well past that number. One heavily worn starburst clip with visibly loose stones and a chipped setting still sold for over $1,000 purely because of the maker's name stamped on the back. Just sit with that for a second. The piece had obvious visible damage, and it still commanded serious money because the buyer wasn't paying for how it looked sitting on a table. They were paying for who made it. The very loudness that makes you want to look away is the exact same quality that makes a serious collector lean all the way in. Here's the detail most people never think to check with a piece like this. Turn it over and look for a tiny mark near the pin catch. Sometimes a maker's name, sometimes just a small symbol pressed into the metal. A signed example from the right house, even with a cracked or missing stone, can outsell a flawless unsigned one by a factor of 10, because collectors in this category are ultimately paying for a name, not for perfection. Number 8. The Tangled Sterling Charm Bracelet. Picture the loud, jangly bracelet almost every family seems to have somewhere, crammed with dented little charms nobody can identify anymore. Half of them missing an eye or a wing or a wheel. To most grandchildren, it looks like noisy clutter destined for the junk drawer forever. To a collector, it is something else entirely. It is a diary written in silver, a record of one woman's entire life told through tiny souvenirs. A fully loaded vintage sterling piece with 15 or 20 well-made charms regularly sells for $100 to $600. And the more personal and unusual the charms, the higher that number climbs. Even a single charm can carry serious money entirely on its own, especially the little articulated ones built to actually do something. A windmill whose blades spin, a mailbox whose tiny door opens, a typewriter with a carriage that slides. Collectors will sometimes pay more for that one moving charm than for the entire bracelet it hangs from. So don't let the tangle fool you into thinking it's worthless. Untangle it slowly, charm by charm, and gently test each piece before you ever let it go. Number 7. The discolored Ivory-look cameo brooch. The carved profile brooch might be the single most old-fashioned piece of jewelry on the entire planet. And that reputation is exactly why younger family members hand it off the moment they inherit it, usually without even opening the little velvet box it came in. But the gap between worthless and valuable here is enormous, and almost nobody in the family ever bothers to check which side of that gap they're actually standing on. A molded plastic reproduction isn't worth the box it came in. A genuine cameo, hand-carved from real shell or hard stone and set in true gold or sterling, is a completely different animal, bringing anywhere from $100 to several $100s, with exceptional signed examples in fine detail, climbing into 4 figures. Hold it up to the light and study the carving closely. Real craftsmanship has a depth and a shadow you can practically feel with your eyes, a dimensionality that cheap molded plastic simply cannot fake, no matter how good the paint job looks. And the yellowed, aged look that makes it seem old and cheap to a casual eye is often the very thing that proves it's genuine, because true shell and hard stone age and mellow in ways plastic never does.
The carving subject matters more than most people ever stop to consider, too. A standard female profile is by far the most common, the most valuable version you'll come across. A mythological scene carved with multiple figures represents a far higher level of skill and a far smaller surviving supply, and it prices accordingly, sometimes
Number 6. The Black Victorian mourning brooch. This one genuinely unsettles people, and I completely understand why. We're talking about black jet pieces and brooches woven from actual human hair. Jewelry built specifically to mark the death of someone the wearer loved, and casual sellers cannot get rid of these fast enough, practically pressing them into a dealer's hands just to get them out of the house. But Queen Victoria herself turned mourning jewelry into an entire flourishing industry after Prince Albert died. And these pieces are actively, quietly collected today, with well-made gold-framed examples commanding real respect from people who understand what they're looking at. The discomfort is the whole opportunity. Everyone else is too squeamish to reach for it, which means the demand stays soft and quiet. And that is precisely where the knowledgeable collector finds bargains. Everyone else is too unsettled to notice. Genuine Whitby jet is warm to the touch, while glass imitations flooding the market today are cold and heavy in your hand. A woven hair brooch set in a gold frame with a painted miniature portrait can bring several hundred to over $1,000 to a buyer who is actively looking for exactly this kind of piece. French jet, a glass imitation, floods the resale market today, which is exactly why real Whitby jet is so aggressively hunted by the collectors who know how to tell the two apart at a glance. Now, before we get into the top 5, there's something every jewelry owner absolutely needs to understand, because it applies to every single item on this list. The biggest mistake people make isn't tossing something that's obviously valuable. Nobody does that. The mistake is assuming a piece has little or no worth simply because it's ugly, dated, or unfashionable by today's standards. Every single year, genuinely valuable rings, brooches, necklaces, and bracelets end up in donation boxes, garage sales, and estate liquidations because their owners were never taught what collectors and professional appraisers actually look for. It almost never comes down to how attractive a piece is. It comes down to a small handful of details. Metal purity marks stamped somewhere discreet, maker's hallmarks hiding on a clasp or the back of a setting, the specific type of stone setting used, the quality of hand craftsmanship hiding just beneath the surface, invisible until you know exactly where to look. Once you understand what those signs actually look like, you will never judge a piece of jewelry by how pretty it is ever again. That's exactly why I put together the Jeweler's Dirty Secret, a complete guide that breaks down the exact markings, quality indicators, and valuation principles that professional jewelers quietly use every single day to separate treasure from trash. Whether you're sorting through an old inherited jewelry box, hunting through estate sales, or just curious about what's sitting in your own drawer right now, this guide will change the way you look at every ugly, dated, forgotten piece you own. You can grab it right now using the link in the description or by scanning the QR code on your screen.
Now, let's get back to the countdown, because the next 5 pieces are the ones that genuinely change lives. Number 5, the Tarnished sterling squash blossom necklace. If you've ever seen one of these sitting in the back of a drawer, blackened almost solid and dull from decades of neglect, your first instinct was probably to think it just needed a good polish and nothing more. Heavy, old-looking silver jewelry like this often gets carried straight to a scrap buyer and sold by the gram, and the seller walks away feeling like they got something for nothing. That can be an extremely expensive mistake. Generic tourist-grade silver really is worth only a bit over scrap value. That part is honestly true, and I won't pretend otherwise. But pieces made by named Southwestern silversmiths, set with turquoise pulled from mines that have since closed permanently and can never be reopened, regularly bring $400 to $1,200, with the finest documented examples climbing well into the thousands. The tarnish that makes it look neglected and worthless to a casual eye is often nothing more than decades of honest wear, sitting on top of genuine skilled craftsmanship underneath. Before you ever sell one of these by weight, flip it over and look carefully for a maker's stamp. That tiny mark, easy to miss if you're not looking for it, can be the entire difference between $40 at a scrap counter and $4,000 at auction.
Number 4, the yellowed strand of what looks like plastic pearls. This is the one that fools people the hardest because the material itself looks so obviously cheap and fake at first glance. A dull, slightly yellowed strand of round beads looks exactly like the kind of costume jewelry you'd find in a $5 bin at any thrift store in the country. And most people never think twice before tossing it aside or selling the whole strand for almost nothing. But if that strand predates the 1920s, there's a real chance those beads aren't imitation pearls at all. They may be natural pearls that formed entirely on their own inside a wild oyster, with no human intervention whatsoever. No farmer, no seed, nothing but chance and time. Cultured pearls, the kind deliberately started by a farmer, range from about $100 to $20,000 for the finest documented examples. Natural pearls start around $500 and can surpass $100,000, and they are so scarce today that they almost never appear in ordinary jewelry stores anymore, surfacing instead in old family collections and major auctions. Here's the honest warning, because I've watched this exact mistake happen more than once. You cannot tell the difference just by looking, and neither can a pawn shop counter, no matter how confident the person behind it sounds. Only an X-ray test performed at a proper gem laboratory can prove what's actually inside the bead, and that test costs a tiny fraction of what a genuine natural pearl could be worth. Number 3, the dented pot metal figural pin. The enamel is chipping badly. The metal underneath looks dull, cheap, and a little corroded. It's shaped like some quirky little animal or flower that seems at a glance like a dime store novelty from another century. The kind of thing that ends up loose in the bottom of a junk drawer with old keys and dead batteries. This is exactly the kind of piece people toss into the giveaway pile without a second thought, because absolutely nothing about its appearance screams valuable. But certain mid-century designers use genuine, carefully sourced crystal and painstaking hand-set construction, even on their most whimsical, silliest-looking figural pieces, and collectors seek those exact designs out by name today, sometimes obsessively. A rare figural pin in worn, visibly damaged condition has sold for well over $2,000 purely on the strength of the maker and the rarity of the specific design. Think carefully about what that actually tells you. The piece had obvious, undeniable damage, and it still pulled in serious money because the people bidding on it in that room weren't paying for how the pin looked sitting on a velvet pad. They were paying for what it actually was underneath the damage. A cracked, chipped example in a rare, unusual design will almost always outperform a flawless example in a common, everyday one. So never let visible wear talk you out of getting a piece properly identified first. Number 2. The heavy, dull gold ring with the ugly, antique cut stone. If you've ever inherited an old ring with a chunky, slightly lopsided diamond that looks strangely uneven under bright light, your first instinct was probably to assume it was simply a low-quality, poorly cut stone that somebody settled for decades ago. Do not assume that before you look closer. If the stone looks chunky, slightly asymmetrical, with a flat, open spot near the center, you can practically see straight through. You may be looking at an old mine-cut diamond, shaped entirely by hand using techniques jewelers stopped using around 1930, because that particular cut simply doesn't exist in modern jewelry anymore. The stones themselves are genuinely rare, and the market treats them exactly that way once someone finally recognizes what they are holding. Old mine-cut diamond rings start around a few $100s, average solidly into the thousands, and the finest documented examples have sold for well over $100,000 at specialty auctions. For decades, families carried rings exactly like this into ordinary jewelers to have the stones recut into modern, perfectly symmetrical shapes to make them look nicer and more current. And every single recut destroyed that antique value permanently and irreversibly. The crooked, old-fashioned look your family found embarrassing at the mall counter is precisely what serious collectors now pay a real premium for today. If you are survived untouched all these years, do not let anyone near it with a cutting wheel before a specialist in antique diamonds has examined it first. Photograph the stone from several angles before you take it anywhere so you have a clear record of exactly what it looked like the moment it left your hands. Number 1. The plain, unsigned costume ring everyone assumes is junk. This is the piece I saved for last because it quietly ties every single entry on this entire list together, and it is the one that costs people the most money without them ever realizing what actually happened. Somewhere in almost every jewelry box in this country sits a plain-looking ring. No maker's name visible anywhere on it, no obvious sparkle. Nothing about it that screams valuable at a glance. So it gets sold off in a lot with everything else for a flat $10, or worse, melted down entirely for a few dollars worth of scrap gold. But some of the most valuable pieces of jewelry in the world were never signed at all. Early workshop pieces, one-of-a-kind private commissions, handmade rings from small regional jewelers who simply never bothered stamping their work. All of it hides in plain sight precisely because there's no famous name attached for anyone to research online. The value in these cases comes down entirely to the small physical details a trained eye can spot in seconds.
The measured purity of the metal itself, the precise way a stone is set into its bezel, the quality of hand engraving visible only under magnification, completely unsigned ring with the right underlying construction and the right stone, sold at auction for tens of thousands of dollars, purchased by a single buyer who genuinely understood exactly what they were looking at, while everyone else who saw it beforehand simply walked right past it without a second glance, because there was no name on the box to Google and no story to search for online. That is the real lesson buried inside this entire countdown. The value was never really about how a piece looks sitting on the outside. It was always about who made it, how carefully they made it, and how few pieces exactly like it managed to survive until today. So before you ever clear out a single drawer, and before you ever accept the very first lowball offer someone hands you across a counter, go find the ugliest, most forgotten pieces you own and check every single mark hiding on them. Hit the like button if even one of these 10 pieces genuinely surprised you today. Subscribe to the channel, because we go this deep on every single video we make, week after week. And drop a comment down below telling me exactly which one of these 10 you think might actually be sitting somewhere in your own house right now, forgotten in a drawer or a box you haven't opened in years. I read every single comment, I promise you that. And one last thing before you go. If any single piece on this list made you pause, even for a second, do not let that feeling fade by tomorrow morning. Go find the box tonight, the one shoved to the back of a closet or forgotten under a stack of old photographs. Take everything out, lay it flat under a bright light, and turn every single piece over. Look for the marks, look for the names, look for the small, easy-to-miss details this entire video was really about. Because the difference between an ugly piece of junk and a genuine small fortune usually comes down to nothing more than a few seconds of actually looking. And whatever you do, no matter who is sitting across the table from you with an offer in hand, do not sell before you check.